Today I'm out in the shop and I'm going to clean and service my 2013 Mustang GT battery, and this is part of my oil change series. So the reason I do that is because I want to clean and service my battery periodically, like once per year. And if I do my oil change once per year, or on my annual oil change that I do, because most Mustangs aren't driven in the wintertime, and if you're down south and you're driving your Mustang year-round, you figure out when you want to do it, but annually is when you want to clean and service your battery. Of course, this task really applies to any vehicle. You know, it's not specific just to the Mustang. I'm going to show you what wrenches I need to get my 2013 Mustang battery out, but 2005 to 2014 Mustang, they're the same body style. They have the battery located in the same location, but this really applies to any vehicle. Before I get started, let me just say, this is embarrassing. I know I'm going to get a lot of comments on it. This area of the firewall insulation has been ruined by chipmunks. Parked on the lawn, and I live out in the woods, and that actually was damaged by chipmunks taking it for insulation for their nest. I have many other videos on general automotive work, modifications, and tips. If you find this video helpful, consider watching the other videos and subscribing to my channel. Some things I'm going to need to do this task, or tools: 5/16 combination wrench to remove my battery terminal clamps, or 8mm. It's 5/16 or 8mm. So a deep well socket to get my battery hold down clamp off, a battery terminal brush, large regular screwdriver. It may be necessary to pry the terminals apart just a little bit and to get them off. Some wheel bearing grease. I'm using a synthetic wheel bearing grease, but it can be just a cheap wheel bearing grease. And then a good quality nickel anti-seize for the threads on the battery terminals. And of course, gloves and safety glasses. Whenever you're working with a battery, make sure you're wearing your safety glasses. I don't always wear my safety glasses when I'm working on a car, but when you're working on a battery, you have the sulfuric acid and you want to wear your safety glasses. Here's one other tip, that if you have a vehicle that has electronics that lose their memory, like your radio, the stereo that loses its memory, you can use a Trickle Charger to connect to the terminal ends, and so you can maintain the memory on those kind of devices. Not necessary, you can just reprogram that your stations in the radio if you need to. A word of caution though, if you're going to use this, make sure you're very careful that you're not arcing out your terminals. You know, and make sure that they're isolated from each other and away from the car. Always start with the negative battery terminal, because if you touch the terminal wrench, whatever wrench you're using to the frame, you're not going to arc out the battery. If you do it to the positive side first, you're going to arc out and possibly melt the wrench or weld the wrench, and that could burn you, and or you could cause the battery to explode. So always start with the negative side. Remove the negative battery clamp from the negative battery terminal, and you can tell I've cleaned this battery before, so the threads are very nice. They have anti-seize on them already, and the clamp's gonna probably come off fairly easy. I'm gonna spread it a little bit to make it go back on easier for me. And pull it off straight. Don't hammer on it. You never want to use a hammer, and I never really like to pry underneath like this. Always spread a little more if you need to, but I don't like to pry because you'll ruin the battery terminal. And never hammer on the terminal. I love you too. I'm recording, so be quiet, please. So then set that terminal clamp aside so it doesn't come in contact with your negative post again as you're working on the positive side. And this is a funky positive clamp, the way it's got a wedge to cause this to come together, which is kind of nice because it puts the nut up on top. So I could really use my ratchet, but I have a ratcheting combination wrench, so I'm going to use that. And that one's going to come off pretty easy without prying, but you can also tell I've cleaned this one before and it's got grease on it already, even though the grease is dirty. And so I'm going to put that back away from the battery to make sure it doesn't come in contact with the positive terminal again. And if I need to, I can use an old rag. I can use an old rag to push this back and not scratch my car. I'm going to take off the battery insulator. Get that out of my way. Let me bring you in for a close-up here. Now this battery hold down has both a strap and it's got the classic Ford wedge at the bottom, so that most batteries are just held down at the bottom, at least Ford batteries, but this one's got a backup strap to it. So just simply take that 8mm head size bolt and loosen it. And I'm going to use a little 1/4-inch ratchet, 6-point deep well socket, an extension on it. It really doesn't need the extension, and that comes out pretty easy because the threads have anti-seize on them already too. So here again, there's water in mine because I washed the engine before doing this video. Again, it's just a wedge that holds down the bottom lip of that battery, and this one is attached to the firewall in the battery tray. So I'm going to just put that up in the cowl, and now I can just lift my battery up and out to take it outside and clean it. Once I have the battery out of the car, I want to clean the battery and the battery tray with water and baking soda. Now, I use Arm & Hammer. This is just pure baking soda. The only ingredient is sodium bicarbonate, 100%. So, just baking soda that neutralizes the acid of the battery. And when I clean my battery tray, I just let it run down wherever it wants to run, because the battery tray has drains in it. This particular tray has one drain in it down in the bottom here. If I move out of the way where you can get some light, you can see down here, and that just drains down past the frame. So you can see that bolt is on the frame right there, and that I'll just let the baking soda run down into that and wherever it may, and then around the battery tray here, which usually acid doesn't get out here, but in case it does, vapors and things, then the sodium bicarbonate doesn't hurt anything. It just neutralizes the acid if there is any acid. And if I see any bubbles coming from any of these components, I'll make sure I douse it with that baking soda even more and let it soak until it neutralizes everything, so there's no more bubbles. And I also clean it up with Dawn dishwashing soap, and then use a sponge and brushes, whatever's necessary to clean out that battery tray, and then a brush on the outside of the battery. I clean the sides, the top, and the bottom of the battery, and being careful not to get the battery vents with the sodium bicarbonate. I don't want any of the baking soda to get inside the battery, just on the outside. I don't have a formula. I just use a couple of tablespoons of baking soda in the water. I'm running out of baking soda in this box. Need another box of baking soda. A couple of generous tablespoons in the water. Put the lid back on and shake it up. And again, this baking soda doesn't hurt anything, so I can get it on other parts of the car and paint. And then I'm going to use it generously in the battery tray in the outside of the battery. Again, if I see any bubbling here on my terminal clamps, I'm going to continue to douse it with my baking soda, but I don't see any because I've already treated these with grease before. My battery I've taken outside and I've cleaned it up using the baking soda and water and then Dawn dishwashing soap, and I also have my disposable gloves on with my safety glasses, and then I'm going to bring it back into the shop and hose it off good with just plain water and dry it off with compressed air if I need to, or just let it sit outside while I'm cleaning up my battery tray in the car. And then I'm going to use a terminal brush. This terminal brush has two parts, one for the terminal clamps and then for the terminals themselves. And as I use this, I just put it on the terminal and I go just one way, I go clockwise. And that'll help the brush last a long time. If I use a scrubbing motion back and forth, then it'll ruin the brush and it won't last very long. But this does a good job, and I pull it up, push it down, pull it up, push it down several turns, and it cleans up those terminals very well. Just keep doing it till it goes from a dull finish to a shiny finish. Good shiny finish. Now it's nice and clean, and I can use a wire brush and clean up the tops just a little bit if I'm so inclined. Doesn't matter, it's not a contact area. Just cleans them up and makes them look a little nicer. Makes them look clean. Not necessary. Try to go in one direction, kind of for a buffed, clean look. And that's the battery that's clean. Now to get to the service part of it. Now, I hesitate to tell you this because not all batteries are the same. These batteries are all maintenance free. They're not intended to be serviced in this way. But notice this battery has the caps that are very distinguishable from the rest of the battery. Some batteries don't look like this. The caps look integral to the top, and some of them are glued on. These caps are not glued on, and I can use a large regular screwdriver and pry them off, carefully pry them off, and they come off. So that's the vent cap. It does for 3 cells, and I can do that for both sides. And if it's dirty here, I just wipe it down, try not to get any debris into the individual cells. And then I can look down into the individual cells and see the water level. or the acid level. So if I look down in the individual cells, and if I can see the plates like this one, it's hard to tell with the camera. If you could see the plates, most of these I just see water. I'm going to add just a little bit of distilled water to that cell. Nothing else. And I'm not going to overfill it. You know, what you want to do is just cover the plates and not have it come up to the top of the hole. You can see these are down an inch from the top of the hole. That's where I want to be. I don't want to be all the way full. And that's servicing the battery. Once I've added just a little bit of distilled water to that cell, you can put the caps back on. And no tools, just tap them back on. It should fit snugly. Over at the car, I'm going to continue my work with the terminal clamp brush. And again, I just go one direction with it. I go clockwise. And this brush is getting kind of worn out, so I can kind of pivot it back and forth to make sure I'm cleaning the inside of those clamps, that contact area inside the clamps. Go from a dull to a shinier finish inside the clamps. And if I haven't taken these apart before, I could take this bolt all the way out and clean it and clean the threads and put notice that the brush is tapered just like the battery terminal is tapered, just like the inside of the clamps are tapered. So I don't want to go from the top, I want to go from the bottom side. And again, I go clockwise, cleaning up those terminals. The idea is so I have a perfect connection between the battery and the battery terminal. Good clean connection, so I can transfer as much power as possible from the battery into the battery cable. And again, if I haven't taken this apart before, I could take this terminal all the way apart and apply grease or anti-seize to it to make sure it stays healthy and can live in this environment with the sulfuric acid. I'm going to apply anti-seize to the bolts down in the bottom of the battery tray. Keep them from corroding. You can apply the wheel bearing grease to this too. It's a good application. Protects them. Protects it from the acid, keeps the acid off of the metal parts. Notice the battery tray is all plastic, so I really don't need to apply anything to the plastic. It doesn't hurt. If I apply oil inside the battery tray, it's going to drip down through the hole and go to the frame, possibly protect the frame. If I don't care what my car looks like underneath, then I certainly could do that. Just apply some oil down in here and let it over time drip to the frame, or apply the wheel bearing grease. So good heavy coat of anti-seize to these washers and bolts, or flange head bolts. Make sure they're protected. Let me show you this neat feature of this battery tray. This battery tray is designed for a larger battery. It has these little side tabs that can come out that slide into a little notch right here, and that's on either side, so you can lift that up, pull it out. It's got a little double notch right there that it just slides onto. So hold the battery in here. So you could put a larger battery that'd go all the way out to here, in here. As long as it's the same width, it could be a longer battery, and it could be a little bit taller. There's room on the top of the battery, maybe an inch. So you could put a larger group size generally speaking, larger the battery, the more cold cranking amps, or at least more reserve power that it has. Add just a little bit of anti-seize back to the threads here. Good. Came apart really well. Apart just a little more. And I'm going to leave that spread. I'm not going to tighten it up too much, so I can put it back on the battery. And then I can apply my wheel bearing grease to the bottom side of this. Since I can't get to it from the top, I don't want to get it on my contact point, the surface I just cleaned inside the terminal, but anywhere else that's going to corrode. A light coat keeps the metal from corroding, protects it. These ones are hard to get to down inside. Use a paintbrush or something, but they've already got a little bit of grease on them already from the previous cleaning. But you just want to redo this every year to make sure they're protected. So that back lip of the battery needs to go under the battery tray there, and then the clamp will go down in the front to hold it. So put it in, slide it back towards the firewall. And before I put that clamp down, I neglected to put grease on that, put on the threads. It's captive. It's got a little press-on little washer there to hold it so it doesn't come out, so it makes it assembly. And as that gets installed and pushes down, clamps down onto the battery, taper. Again, I'm going to keep the terminals back away from the battery until I'm ready to put them on. Go on nice and easy, just pushing the battery back towards the firewall as it clamps down and wedges it. Don't have to get too carried away. Again, that's 5/16 or 8 millimeters, so you don't have to torque on it too hard, and then put a lot of clamping force on that strap. Just add security, I suppose. And the insulating blanket, backside's got a part number on it if you're interested. Slides over the battery. And really, this battery tray was made, you could use a larger battery than this one. Reverse order of how you took them off. So positive first, then negative. Again, same reason. You could arc out the battery. So that one should slide right on pretty easily. Tighten up the terminal. And that's got a wedge shape there. So as I tighten it in down, it pulls the terminal together. And I don't have to get too carried away, but to give it a little twist, make sure it's not loose. Should clamp down good. Remember, I want a good clamped force on it so I get a good positive connection between the cable clamp and the terminal. And then the same thing for the negative side. Again, I don't want to touch anything once I have a circuit completed. So all the way down, I want to make sure that the top of the battery terminal is below the terminal clamp. Just use my 5/16 or 8mm wrench to tighten that up. And again, give it a little shake. Just tighten it up. You can always go back and check it after driving, do a test drive, come back and check them one more time, make sure they're tight. And give the battery a shake, make sure it's tight. Again, this is part of my oil change series. So you do a multi-point inspection on your car as you're doing the oil change, and you're cleaning and servicing different components. For instance, the mass airflow sensor, the throttle body, doing the air cleaner as you're doing part of the oil change, clean and service the battery, clean and service the cabin air filter, make sure you're inspecting all the belts and hoses, and then inspecting underneath the car as you're doing the oil change. Well, that concludes the video. If you found it helpful, let me know in the comments, and please subscribe.